welcome back YouTube subscribers and new viewers as well. This is a finished project which incorporates the Games Workshop Imperial Sector, the Skyshield Landing Pad, and an assortment of ArmorCast pieces. What I wanted to do is, I think, break this video up into probably at least 2 or maybe 3 segments, just because there's so many pieces involved and a few different things that I wanted to discuss about them. And I wanted to start with the Games Workshop Imperial Sector buildings and describe a little bit about what I did and some of the finishing techniques. So what I did first is when I assembled them, and actually there's a video that shows the assembly prior to painting and basing of these, is that I cut a few styrene plastic sheets to add as extra panels so that I could span the overall set so that I could make some somewhat larger buildings. The buildings each, let me pick this up, turn this around for you. The buildings each feature large rubble piles in the back. The rubble piles are crumbled plaster from excess materials that I've used for the when I've had bad casts from like Hearst Arts buildings. And what I've done then is I've painted them to match the building, as I figure buildings that are a color and crumble should have rubble that matches them, and it adds some visual interest on the table as well, rather than just having that flat, matte, gray, black motif. The bases have been painted to match the Ash Wasteland GW board sets that I've done in the past, and it's an overall nice contrast to the buildings themselves. You could drop that on black felt or anything similar to get a decent looking playing surface. The buildings, and so what I've done then is over the styrene cards, I've added in some of the GW bits to help blend them in, and it really allows me to add quite a few extra panels to really flesh out the buildings and have them really look pretty seamless with the rest of the panels. And actually, one of the things that I like about doing this is it also breaks up the incredibly dense visual look that these building sprues have. I mean, they're wonderful, they have a lot of detail on them, but it's god-awful busy on the eye, so having a couple plain panels just to take up a little bit of that center space really helps to tone that down just a touch, and I think makes the building overall even more attractive. One of the new things also I've done on this is I've started using some weathering powders, and I mentioned it I think in a previous video, but by the weathering powders really give me a much better control over like smoke effects, I think, and look a lot more realistic than adding or trying to dry brush in with sort of like Chaos Black or something similar to that. I think one of the advantages of the powders also is the ability to, well, I'm going to show you a close-up of this spot here. So you can see here, excuse me, this is some blended powders, so I can get a sort of gradient effect, where it's a little bit darker around the edges, and then I can speckle in a little bit of white to represent some ash crumbles that are in and about it, and it really allows you to kind of get a little more creative in a way that dry brushing doesn't really allow. You can see, let me see if and you can see some of that blending going on in here as well, little bits of ash, some of the dirty rust color, some of the grayer blended in with some brown, and it gives you some really creative freedom in how to represent debris and dirt without worrying about, when you try to dry brush in colors, about them overbrushing the tops. The dust will settle into the cracks. You can brush it in, scrub it in, and then wipe it off a little bit on the top, and I just been really pleased overall with the effect that the weathering powders give me. You can see in other areas where I've added in some rust, added in some more scorch marks, and some more blending in here. And I think overall it really helps to dirty up the buildings and gives me some real control over its application, and I think produces some of the best effects that I've produced to date on weathered buildings. When I went through, I'll tell you what, let me show you 2 other buildings while I talk about some of the other factors I did on these. So here you see 2 more buildings, and I've done each of the buildings pretty much in a different color scheme to help, again, provide some interest on the tabletop, and looking at some of the buildings that I've seen finished by other people. I really like that overall breakup rather than having a bunch of similar shaded buildings. I decided to take a little bit of a chance and go with a sort of a brighter color on this building, and the red really, it's an interesting color, and it doesn't really video or photograph very well. If you go to the website, I've color corrected the photo to give you a better sense of the color of this building. But what I really wanted to talk about at this point is just to say that, one of the difficulties in doing a project like this is that there's so much time involved. This project, since the completion of the actual construction of the buildings, I've spent about 25 hours basing, doing the rubble, painting them, picking out the details, weathering them, sealing them. There's a lot of time involved in it, and it gets a little expensive, quite frankly. So what I did is I decided for these buildings to decide to do 1 hour of trim work on each building prior to doing the weathering effects. So each building I decided to go in and spend 1 hour picking out some details, picking out some of the, the ridges, giving them a different contrast color that helps set them off from the base, picking out the lights. But really that prevents me from doing, some fine, highlighting on the lamps themselves to show that they're lit or that, that they've been cracked or anything similar to that. And I think it's a good decision because it keeps me from getting frenetically busy with the detail. And when you pan back a little bit, and you look at it from a gamer's perspective, really what's going to come out and capture your eye is the major weathering blast effects, the overall structure of the building, and these kind of help to just set it off without needing you to get too involved in it. And I think it was a good compromise overall. It's a plan I'm probably going to try to incorporate in the future. So let's take a look at the next building pair, and that leads us into the ArmorCast pieces.